You don't always realize it when it happens. There is a moment quiet, almost polite, when a film stops following time as you understand it. Nothing explodes. No one screams. The camera doesn't warn you, and yet somewhere between one scene and the next, you lose your footing. You think you missed something, you rewind. But the film doesn't give it back. Some horror movies aren't designed to scare you. They're designed to disorient you. They bend chronology just enough that cause no longer guarantees effect. They let memories arrive before events. They allow characters to react to things you haven't seen yet, things you may never see at all. And the longer you watch, the more dangerous the experience becomes, because the film isn't trying to shock you. It's trying to make you doubt your own perception. These are stories where time slips sideways without explanation, where space feels familiar but never quite stable, where sanity doesn't collapse in a single moment, but erodes quietly, scene by scene, until even the calmest frame feels untrustworthy. You don't leave these films frightened in the usual way. You leave them replaying moments that may not have happened in the order you remember, arguing with yourself about what was real, what was imagined, and whether that distinction still matters. Tonight, we're not looking at horror built on jump scares or sudden violence. We're entering a different kind of nightmare, one constructed through structure rhythm and deliberate confusion. 15 horror films designed not to terrify you outright, but to bend time, space, and sanity until the ground beneath the story quietly disappears. And once it does, there's no guarantee you'll ever find it again. Bạn muốn tôi tiếp tục viết phần count up, bắt đầu từ phim số 15 hay? 1. Possession, 1981. There is no stable time inside Possession. There is only rupture. Scenes explode into existence without preparation, then collapse just as suddenly. Emotional extremes arrive without transition. The film doesn't move forward so much as tear through moments, leaving no clear path behind it. Relationships don't deteriorate over time, they disintegrate in place. Identity fractures mid-scene. Space itself feels hostile, bending around performances that refuse containment. The viewer is denied orientation, not gradually, but violently. What separates this experience from confusion is its precision. Every rupture feels intentional. The film dismantles temporal logic with such force that resistance becomes impossible. You're not asked to follow, you're dragged. When the final images arrive, they don't resolve anything. They seal the experience. Time doesn't end here, it simply stops being relevant. 2. The Brood, 1979. Time in The Brood doesn't drift, it manifests. Emotional states materialize before they're understood. Psychological wounds refuse to remain internal, reshaping the present in ways that feel both immediate and delayed. Cause and effect still exist, but their order has become disturbingly flexible. The film collapses the distance between thought and consequence. Moments that should unfold gradually instead appear fully formed, as if time has skipped the process and delivered only the result. The viewer is left trying to trace origins that no longer behave chronologically. What disorients most is how logical it all feels. The film doesn't present madness as chaos, it presents it as a system with its own internal timing. Once accepted, the horror becomes unavoidable. By the final movements, the sense of temporal stability is gone. The past hasn't passed. It has taken shape, and it isn't finished. 3. Images, 1972. Reality in Images doesn't break, it multiplies. Scenes repeat with slight alterations, like memories recalled from different emotional states. Voices appear where no one stands. Faces return wearing expressions that don't belong to the moment. The film never signals when perception slips, it simply allows versions of the same reality to coexist. Time becomes unreliable because identity does. The viewer is forced to share a perspective that cannot stabilize where past interactions echo into the present without context or confirmation. Moments don't resolve, they layer. What makes the experience deeply unsettling is the absence of a corrective frame. There is no outside vantage point to retreat to. The film denies the comfort of distance, trapping the audience inside a mind that can no longer distinguish recollection from invention. By the end, the disorientation feels complete, not because answers are withheld, but because the concept of a single verifiable truth has quietly dissolved. 4. Let's Scare Jessica to Death, 1971. From its opening moments, Let's Scare Jessica to Death refuses to confirm what it's showing you. Time unfolds gently, almost kindly. Days appear to pass in a calm, pastoral rhythm, but subtle inconsistencies begin to surface. Conversations don't align with previous scenes. Reactions feel delayed or prematurely defensive. The film never tells you where the disconnect lies. What creates disorientation isn't chaos, but doubt. The narrative continually offers plausible explanations, then quietly undermines them. You're left oscillating between interpretations, unsure whether the instability comes from the environment or from perception itself. As scenes repeat emotional beats without repeating events, the sense of linear progression dissolves. The film doesn't ask you to choose what's real. It asks whether that distinction is even accessible from the inside. When it ends, there's no release, only a lingering uncertainty. Not about what happened, but about whether certainty was ever possible in the first place. 5. The Kindred, 1987. In The Kindred, the past refuses to stay buried where it belongs. Time here doesn't fracture, it overlaps. Childhood memories intrude on adult reality without warning. Physical spaces seem to contain echoes of earlier lives, replaying fragments that were never meant to resurface. The film moves forward, but it drags its history behind it, like an exposed nerve. What makes the experience unsettling is how seamlessly the transitions occur. There are no clear boundaries between then and now. One moment slips into another, leaving the viewer unsure whether they're witnessing a memory, a discovery, or a repetition. As the narrative tightens, the sense of temporal separation collapses entirely. The body becomes a site where time records itself, where inheritance is not symbolic but physical. Past decisions manifest in the present with horrifying inevitability. By the final act, the film suggests something deeply disturbing. Time doesn't pass, it accumulates and eventually demands to be acknowledged. 6. Messiah of Evil, 1973. There's a point in Messiah of Evil where time seems to simply stop checking in. The town doesn't operate on a recognizable schedule. Day and night bleed into each other without transition. Streets feel occupied and abandoned at the same time, as if the film is presenting moments from different hours simultaneously. You're never told when anything is happening, only that it is. Scenes unfold with a dreamlike inevitability. Characters move through spaces as though drawn by habits formed long before the story began. Events don't escalate. They accumulate quietly, pressing down until the weight becomes undeniable. What disorients most is the absence of urgency. The film doesn't rush toward danger, it drifts into it. Time becomes less a sequence and more a stagnant atmosphere, trapping both characters and viewers inside a place that feels permanently out of sync with the outside world. By the end, the town doesn't feel destroyed. It feels preserved, locked in a moment that never quite belonged to the present. 7. The Ninth Configuration, 1980. Madness in the Ninth Configuration doesn't arrive screaming, it arrives laughing. The film presents itself as structured, dialogue-driven, intellectual, almost theatrical. But beneath that surface, time and logic slip constantly. Conversations wander into philosophical territory, then veer sharply into absurdity without warning. Emotional shifts occur mid-sentence, destabilizing the rhythm of reality itself. Scenes feel disconnected, not because they don't relate, but because they operate on different wavelengths. Humor and horror coexist without hierarchy, creating a tonal dissonance that erodes the viewer's sense of grounding. You're never quite sure whether a moment is meant to be taken seriously, or whether seriousness is the illusion. As identities blur and belief systems collide, the film refuses to offer a stable interpretive lens. Instead, it forces the viewer to confront a deeper disorientation, the possibility that coherence is something we impose, not something that exists. By the time the film reaches its final movements, time feels irrelevant. What remains is the unsettling thought that sanity itself may just be another narrative we tell ourselves to stay oriented. 8. The little girl who lives down the lane. 1976. At first, everything feels carefully controlled, too controlled. The little girl who lives down the lane builds its disorientation through stillness rather than chaos. Time appears orderly, domestic, almost comforting. Days pass quietly. Conversations remain polite. Nothing seems out of place. And that's precisely the problem. The film stretches moments of calm until they begin to feel artificial, as though they're being preserved beyond their natural lifespan. Scenes linger just long enough for the viewer to question whether they're witnessing normalcy or a performance of it. Information arrives late or not at all. You sense that events have already happened off-screen, shaping the present in ways the film refuses to clarify. The timeline feels incomplete, not broken, like pages missing from a diary you're only allowed to skim. The longer you stay in this controlled environment, the more unstable it becomes. The disorientation doesn't come from sudden shocks, but from the slow realization that safety itself may be an illusion sustained by silence. When the film ends, it doesn't feel like a conclusion. It feels like the moment you realize you've been standing in the wrong place the entire time. 9. Don't Look Now, 1973. Time in Don't Look Now doesn't move forward. It folds back on itself. Images from the future slip quietly into the present, not as revelations, but as intrusions. A flash of color, a familiar shape. A moment that seems emotionally charged, long before its meaning becomes clear. The film never announces these fractures, it lets them pass, as if this were how time has always worked. What disorients isn't the structure alone, but the certainty with which the film treats these disruptions. Grief doesn't follow chronology. Memory doesn't wait its turn. Scenes feel haunted, not by what has happened, but by what is about to. As the narrative progresses, cause and effect lose their authority. Events echo each other across different moments, and the viewer begins to feel trapped inside a loop where recognition arrives seconds too late. The film doesn't ask you to understand time, it asks you to surrender to it. By the end, the unease lingers in a single question. Were you watching a story unfold? Or watching inevitability reveal itself in fragments? 10. The Tenant, 1976. Few films dismantle spatial and temporal certainty as quietly as The Tenant. Time here doesn't fracture, it erodes. Days pass without markers. Identity shifts without acknowledgement. The film moves forward yet feels trapped in place, as if progress itself has become performative rather than real. Spaces repeat with slight variations. Conversations echo earlier exchanges, but not quite accurately. You begin to sense that the film isn't advancing toward a conclusion. It's circling in absence, tightening its orbit with each scene. What unsettles most isn't the transformation itself, but how effortlessly it occurs. The film never signals a turning point. It simply allows the familiar to become unfamiliar until the distinction no longer matters. By the final moments, the viewer isn't sure where the story began or whether it ever truly belonged to a single point in time. The disorientation feels complete, not because the film confuses you, but because it no longer recognizes the need to explain itself. 11. The Comeback, 1978. At first glance, The Comeback appears grounded, structured around memory recovery and return. But its timeline doesn't behave like one. Past and present blur without announcement. Trauma doesn't remain where it belongs. It resurfaces mid-scene, mid-thought, altering the emotional temperature without altering the setting. The film never tells you when a moment shifts, only that it has. What makes the experience disorienting is how natural it feels. The transitions aren't marked by edits or effects. They're psychological. You realize you've slipped into a different temporal layer only after your sense of continuity has already been compromised. As memories repeat in altered forms, the film begins to feel less like a sequence of events and more like a mind attempting and failing to organize itself. The question stops being what happened and becomes whether the present can exist without being rewritten by the past. When the film ends, it leaves behind a troubling uncertainty. Was this a story about healing, or about never truly escaping the moment that broke you? 12. Beyond the Door, 1974. From the moment it begins, Beyond the Door feels out of sync with itself. Scenes don't transition so much as they intrude. Calm domestic moments are interrupted by shifts in tone that arrive without warning or explanation. Time behaves strangely here, not looping, not accelerating, but refusing to settle. Events feel both premature and overdue, as if the story is unfolding slightly ahead of where the audience can follow. Reactions precede causes. Consequences surface before the choices that triggered them are fully understood. The film's power lies in its refusal to clarify. It never establishes a stable before or after. Instead, it moves like a series of disturbances spreading through an already fractured timeline. You're not invited to observe the possession from the outside. You're forced to experience it from within the confusion. By the time the narrative edges toward resolution, the unease isn't rooted in what has happened. It's rooted in the suspicion that the disorder began long before the film ever started. 13. Symptoms, 1974. Some films disorient by accelerating time. Symptoms does the opposite. Here, time seems to stagnate. Scenes linger long past comfort, then dissolve without resolution. Days blur together, not because they're similar, but because the film refuses to mark their passage. You begin to lose your sense of progression, unsure whether events are unfolding or quietly looping. The horror doesn't announce itself. It waits. Characters drift through conversations that feel slightly disconnected from the moment they occur, as if spoken from a different point in time. The film never confirms whether what you're witnessing is happening now happened before or exists only as a fractured recollection. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that disorientation isn't a side effect, it's the structure. The film strips away temporal anchors until nothing feels firmly placed. Even calm scenes carry a sense of wrongness, not because of what's shown, but because of when it seems to exist. When Symptoms ends, it doesn't feel finished. It feels paused, leaving you unsure whether the story concluded or simply stopped letting you watch. 14. The Killing Kind, 1973. At first, it feels like a straightforward psychological descent. But The Killing Kind never allows that simplicity to last. The film moves as though it's skipping over pieces of its own logic. Emotional shifts occur without warning. Characters behave as if their motivations were explained in scenes you somehow missed. The narrative doesn't collapse, it slides subtly away from the viewer's grasp. Time inside the film feels elastic. Moments stretch uncomfortably long, while crucial transitions happen almost invisibly. You're left reconstructing meaning from fragments, unsure whether the story is unraveling or whether it was never meant to be linear in the first place. What lingers is a sense of internal misalignment. The film makes you feel complicit in the disorder, as if your inability to follow the logic is part of the design. The further it goes, the more it suggests that coherence itself might be the illusion. By the time the final moments arrive, the question isn't what the character has become. It's when that transformation actually began and whether you were ever meant to see it clearly. 15. The Psychopath, 1966. There's something unsettling about realizing you're always a step behind a film. Not because it's fast, but because it refuses to wait for you. From its opening moments, The Psychopath behaves as if parts of the story have already happened somewhere off-screen. Characters speak with the certainty of people who know more than they're saying. Reactions arrive before causes. Conversations end as if the most important line was never meant to be heard. The film's structure doesn't guide you forward. It abandons you in the middle of events and lets time close behind you. Scenes don't build tension in a traditional sense. They create the feeling that something essential has already slipped past. By the time danger becomes clear, you're no longer sure when it first appeared. What makes the experience disorienting isn't confusion, it's familiarity. Everything looks ordinary. Streets, homes, gestures. But nothing aligns the way memory expects it to. The film quietly trains you to accept that understanding will always arrive too late. And by the end, the most disturbing thought isn't what happened on screen. It's the suspicion that you never actually saw the beginning. Bonus fact: there's an uncomfortable truth that connects every film in this list. None of them were designed to guide you. These movies don't mislead by accident. They withhold orientation on purpose, stripping away the markers viewers rely on to feel safe. Clear timelines, stable perspectives, reliable cause and effect. In many cases, this wasn't even a thematic decision at first. It emerged from fractured productions, clashing creative visions, or directors who refused to smooth the edges for audience comfort. What's disturbing is what happens afterward. Viewers don't just disagree about interpretations, they disagree about sequences, about what happened first, about whether certain scenes existed at all. These films don't end when the credits roll. They linger as unstable memories replayed differently each time they're recalled, and that raises a troubling possibility. If a film can alter how you remember it, was your experience ever fixed to begin with? If these films unsettled you, it wasn't because of what they showed, but because of what they quietly took away. Your sense of direction, your trust in sequence, your confidence in memory. So here's the question that lingers after the screen goes dark. When a horror film makes you doubt your own recollection of it, does the nightmare belong to the movie or to you?